Okay, there we go. Not quite sure what happened there.
Why? What happened your side?
The intro music kind of came on and then froze.
Oh, okay. You see, now you've got the gremlins in your system. It was all pretty smooth for me this time around. But one day, we had a few episodes where it worked swimmingly. But of course, this is all, guys may not realize this is all being controlled by a mysterious third party called Softmaro. And fair play to him as well. He pulls all the strings and puts it all together. So thanks, Softmaro. Gracias, Softmaro, for everything you do for us here on Bogotá Nights. How's all down your end of the city, Ollie?
Yeah, pretty good. Obviously, there's been protests recently, but it hasn't kind of come up this far. So, yeah, we're chugging along just fine.
Yeah, well, and I just want to say, at least we know somebody's listening to us right now. Softmaro just said nice and thanks. So we do like to get your comments, guys. So those of you listening that aren't part of the production team, do get in touch with us. And we have a fair bit to get through tonight, Ollie. So I might as well tell everybody what we are going to do on Colombia's only live and interactive English language chat show, that is Bogotá Nights. Well, we'll be revealing how you can truly make Colombia your home with our relatively easy 5-step approach, a nod to those wonderful Soviet Union 5-year plans that Ollie is a big fan of. Finding decent accommodation can be a headache in one's country of origin, of course, never mind abroad. And in Colombia, there are some particular, even peculiar things you need to know before you go in search of that dream home, whether you're renting or buying, house sharing, or going it alone. For one, an old-fashioned wander around the barrio you want to live in is still, arguably, the best way to find what you're looking for, if you know what you want, that is. Ollie and I not only live in different parts of Bogota, but we're also at different extremes of the accommodation scale. Ollie's now a homeowner, lovely home that he has there, as we see every week. I'm still a room renter in my room 101 here. And to borrow from my compatriots, you too, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. The search goes on. We want to hear about your experiences getting accommodation here. Did you find it straightforward, or was it a pain in the posterior? Write to us right now using the live comment facility, and your comments will appear on screen. Or if you're watching this recorded, you can still get involved by commenting on where you're viewing or via tweet. The handle being at Bogotá Post. Bogotá Post, everybody's favorite English language newspaper in this country, with the hashtag Bogotá Nights. First, though, it's our take on the news you need to know from the past week. Colombia's riot police, Esmad, as Ollie alluded to there, is making headlines again for all the wrong reasons. We'll explain why shortly. But before that, we're a week into the COVID vaccination program, Ollie, and apparently President Duque said that 1 million Colombians, about 2% of the population, would have got their jab by mid-March. So are we on track?
Well, it depends how optimistic you are, Brendan. It looks like a resounding no. The government's going to have to be clocking out around 50,000 vaccinations a day to reach their target of 1 million vaccines by mid-March. Look, politicians never learn from this, do they? Don't make stupid predictions, because you're just setting yourself up for a fool. I doubt anybody would have cared if there were 800,000 people vaccinated by mid-March, but once you've said that it's going to be 1 million, it looks terrible that you haven't hit it. So yeah, it's kind of a lose. I mean, why on earth Duque sort of made that proclamation, God alone only knows.
Well, you know, Ollie, we give with one hand and take with the other. Last week, we were applauding Duque for what we thought was a wonderful PR move to say that, you know, the vaccines were meant to start the rollout on the 20th of February. And of course, it started, 3 or 4 days before that.
Oh, well, I wouldn't say that was a wonderful move. I mean, we're saying that it was harsh to be criticizing him for delivering ahead of scale. That's, I'd stand by that.
Okay. Well, you know, I like the hyperbole anyway, Ollie. I was saying it was a wonderful move, a masterstroke of public relations from our dear president. But a couple of things that are up in the air, because last week as well, and as we said, and I know we've got a comment in already, and we'll be getting to that in a second. Ollie's monitoring it there while I blab away here. But Emma Newbury, our editor at the Bogotá Post, had asked us how many of these vaccines were COVAX sourced, which I didn't even know what COVAX was, but that's the international organization looking after vaccines for, non-first world countries or non-developed world countries. And we have figures now that about just over 850,000 of Colombia's vaccines so far have been sourced through COVAX, but not one of them has arrived. Is that true, Ollie?
Yeah, actually, that's something I would very much like to see, a change in the discourse there. It really kind of annoys me when we see these headlines kind of saying, oh, Colombia ya tiene, 2,000,000 vacunas de Sinovac, stuff like that. I think it's really unhelpful because actually Colombia doesn't have that. What it means is Colombia has an order for that. And that's very different to having the vaccines in the country being handed out. We've seen massive problems, for example, with AstraZeneca supplying to the EU. There's, no guarantee that similar things won't happen in Colombia. I would much prefer that we count vaccines that we have, not ones that are potentially, as they say, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Well, I'm going to throw in another, but a sporting saying. It reminds me of this team should win on paper. Well, vaccines on paper are no good at all. We need them physically here. But if we're talking about vaccine diplomacy or a vaccine race, like we had the space race in the Cold War I, and lots of people are saying we're already in Cold War II between the US and China right now. Well, there's only one winner, really, Ollie. The Sinovac, if I got the name correct there, but that's the one winning. Not only are they promising it, but apparently next week we're going to have 2 million of the Chinese vaccine here. So they're putting to shame all the other companies that are producing the vaccines at the moment.
Yeah,
anyway.
Well, they're saying that just after next week, the 7th of March, we're going to see, next weekend, we're going to see another 2 million doses arriving. That looks, again, don't talk too much if they're on paper, but it does appear that these ones are actually being loaded, ready to go. They're not sort of, in a few months' time. And actually, some of them have already arrived. I think we've got, here we go. Saturday, we had 192,000 Sinovac vaccines arriving. So it's really interesting that we talked about the criticism Duque was facing for not being as fast or efficient as Peru or Bolivia. They went down the China route, obviously, quite early on. That's what Duque has now done. And he's still getting criticized for it, which, to be honest, whatever he does, I suspect he's going to be criticized. It is interesting that Colombia's turning to China. I think it's a smart decision. The Pfizer vaccine has problems. About temperature, moving it around. Given that Colombia's already in the middle of a strong push to get vaccines out to the Brazilian border regions. So we're talking Guainía, we're talking Valpes, we're talking Amazonas. That's a smart move, I think. It's not going to be popular with people in Bogotá, people in Medellin, people in Cali, but it's probably the right move, I think. Those are very vulnerable populations, and of course there's a lot of fear over mutations in the strains across the border in Brazil.
Yeah, for sure, Ali. By the way, do keep your comments coming in, guys. Alexandra Paleres has written in about our accommodation, and we'll be getting to that in the second half, just after 9:30. So we'll read your comment when we touch on that, Alexandra. But in terms of the vaccines, you were talking about the criticism the 2K gets, and Daisy's lining up as well to take a shot, that the vaccines are not the most effective in the market that the country has sourced. This government is handling the problem pretty poorly. Well, in fairness, I'm an Irishman, and I can't say Ireland being lumped in together with the EU have been firing on all cylinders on the vaccines. Ollie can smile there with like a Cheshire cat, because the Brits have done quite well and are doing.
Yeah, not living in Britain though, am I, Brendan?
Well, maybe you can fly home on a diplomatic passport or something. Who knows? But yeah, well, the vaccines, of course, are one element to this, and we shall monitor proceedings as we go along. But more pushback, or I guess the way I look at it, Ollie, is that we talked about this before. These kind of, well, they're calling them now gastro bars. That's what I wasn't calling them that. But these bars that are in between, they're not quite big restaurants. They're not quite your local tienda. And it could be said they've been left in no man's land with the lockdown restrictions on what can open and what can't open. And they're not happy.
No. So in a sort of blaze of very confusing sort of media attention and a decreto and confirmations and counter confirmations and all kinds of things yesterday, which, you know, was really transporting us back to this what's going on sort of vibe. Yeah, okay. It seems actually fairly simple. Certainly this is what we were saying yesterday when we were talking on WhatsApp, that actually it's much better than in our countries. I mean, in England, there's this muck about whether you're having a substantial meal or not, and what is a substantial meal and what's not. Bogotá has made it fairly simple. Basically, if your business is a beer business or an alcohol business which also sells food, you should be shut. If you're a food business that also sells alcohol, you can open. I think that's a fairly clear definition. Now, where it's not been popular is that I think we all know that for a long time, a lot of bars have been basically operating as quasi-restaurants in order to be able to open. You know, they've been bending over backwards, serving empanadas, organising food to be visible in the bars. They've done what was asked of them. We had a nice little fudge. You know, things seem to be ticking along nicely. I wonder if Claudia thinks that, and she'll have more information than any of us, of course. I wonder if she thinks there's going to be a third wave on the way.
Yeah, I guess that is the concern. And even if she doesn't have the information, maybe there are certain, I'm sure there were images, I didn't see them, of Modelia and various parts of the city at the weekend, where there were bars packed out and stuff like that. So probably that's causing a lot of concern amongst certain people. I was just going to say, though, probably a nice way to sum up what you're saying, if your main business is food and you serve beers and or alcohol as an aside, fine. If it's beer and food, kind of by the way, not fine. I guess it's kind of like saying crepes and waffles versus a BBC, really.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, that would be it. Okay.
I mean, I also expect, I very much expect, by Brendan, to see the BBC, you know, furiously backpedaling and claiming that their primary focus is on those awful pizzas and chicken wings that they serve. And they'll probably get away with it. They're owned by a multinational. They've got a fair bit of palanca. They're the sort of people that can get away with this. I think what's very interesting is that Asobar is the trade body that lobbies for bars. They've said, look, you know, you're punishing the people who are trying to comply with the rules for the sins being committed by those who aren't even trying. And there's a definite logic to that. And look, you know, things are working. We've got a comment in here from Alexandra Pajares, and she makes a really good point. Tiendas. Now, tiendas are a really big problem because, you know, it's a tienda. You've got to have tiendas open. People have to go in to buy, you know, milk and cheese and packets of crisps and whatnot. Now, you know, you've got a table in the corner, somebody sits in and has a sly drink. That seems, again, very much a grey area. And, you know, look, the policing was going fairly well on this. You know, they'd pass by bars and say, look, lads, don't take the piss. It's strange. And by the way, I think we need to be very clear. It doesn't look like the police are that interested in enforcing this. This very much looks like an alcaldía decision.
Yeah, well, and on that point, and thanks for mentioning the tiendas there, Alexandra, because I have to be kind of careful here. I've said on numerous occasions in the past few weeks that at times I feel like I am living in a parallel world, because my barrio up here in the far north of the city that I socialize in, Santandercito, next to Verbenal, I mean, tiendas have been operating, with a select group. I mean, if I'm going to kind of give my excuses, it's like a bubble. If we're calling it a COVID bubble, same people every day. Well, not every day, every weekend, we'll say. And on Saturday night, there were a few of us in having a beer or two. The police came along. Well, they actually did a few rounds of the barrio on various occasions and never said anything. And then maybe a third or fourth time, they came with a different, more police officers, put it this way, there were 6 of them. And they knocked on the door and came in and said, they asked for our cedulas, took all our cedulas, came back in. And as you said, kind of common sense policing. It wasn't like, right, we're going to fine you all right now. It was, look, guys, the alcaldía said this kind of drinking is not on. Drink up, go home. That was it. Which you kind of feel is, okay, fair enough. I know a lot of people might be aghast that we were even in the place, but okay, people can go and check out my blog and see where I'm coming from on this. And also, to me now, what is the difference if you're going to be in a crepes and waffles sitting down with a load of people in, and one is in kind of a what I call a bubble tienda or whatever, having a few drinks. But yeah, it is. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks, and there is that fear, because the way I look at it, Ollie, you mentioned a third wave, and of course that possibility is always there, especially if the vaccine rollout is very slow, as it seems to be. But it is just my perception. I get a feeling that a lot of this opening up is kind of, to borrow from your own Prime Minister, irreversible. I get the feeling that people, if they said, no, we're going back in, I just don't think there'd be any sort of compliance.
How much have we talked about this, Brendan? I mean, over the months, we've kind of mentioned this so many times. It's about how much you can get away with policing, isn't it? It's not just about... It's not just about what you want. It's what you can enforce or what you're willing to enforce. And I think you're right. I mean, look, if push comes to shove, Brendan, and let's say the entire zona, let's say the zona T, let's say they all open. Are the police going to really shut down every single place? I don't think the police have got the stomach for it. They've shown very little. They've shown very little enthusiasm for enforcing any of these rules. This isn't Cali. This isn't Bucaramanga. This isn't even Villavicencio. Those are cities where the police force and the mayor seem to very much be singing from the same song sheet. Here in Bogotá, that's not the case. The police don't take orders from Claudia Lopez, and they're clearly showing it.
Talking about singing from the same hymn sheet, Angela's comment kind of chimes in with what we're talking about right now. And she said, and Angela, a regular viewer, thanks for getting in touch. But I think there is a third wave coming. We've relaxed measures this far. I feel a lot more relaxed now about wearing masks and why not than at the beginning of the pandemic. Also, not much attention of deaths in the media. Figures have lowered, obviously, but it's not like there are 0 deaths. Yeah, I know, but also, to be honest, I would go along with the media here in terms of reporting cases and deaths without context. One bugbear of mine, and I get a lot of criticism for this, but we keep on being met with the headline in the US of 500,000 COVID deaths. It's as if, Ollie, and I know you may not agree with me on this, but I have to say it because it's a bugbear of mine. It's like they're saying that none of those deaths would have happened without COVID. If that was the case, then the US would have had a 2020 of exceptionally low mortality, because in 2020, globally, we just had about 500,000 more deaths. So maybe the US had an excess deaths of 100,000 or whatever. We'll have to see when that comes in. So it's just ridiculous the way it's been portrayed. 500,000 COVID deaths. All these deaths were preventable because measures weren't put in place. That's really not the case. They died with COVID. They were going, probably a lot of these were on their way out, in a sense. Terrible way I put it there, but that is the case. You have to look at it. Figures without context, Ollie, and you know this, and you say this a lot, mean absolutely nothing.
There was a prize one recently about. We saw a report in a newspaper I'm not going to name, but others may have seen it, where they said there's now been more people vaccinated in Colombia than there are active cases. What does that have to do with anything? These are two completely different numbers. It doesn't sort of make any sense to tie those together. But yeah, you're right. I mean, look, journalists in general, and I think we hold our hands up. We've made mistakes at the Bogotá Post in the past. Journalists in general tend to be fairly bad at reporting statistics and numbers in general, I would say. But like you say, let's move on. We're all sick of coronavirus, aren't we?
Yeah, of course. Well, just a couple of comments in relation to the tiendas and stuff, Alexander. Again, quite a grey area, and they're allowed to deliver, and since they're not part of establecimientos comerciales, people can have the after-work beer outside. Well, of course.
By the way, actually, let's just very quickly. I know I said I wanted to move on, but actually, Alexandra's raising a point here. Well, she's not necessarily raising it, but she's like talking about delivery. It seems to me bizarre that you would say, "Oh yeah, you can't go in a bar, where there'll be social distancing rules and stuff. But sure, order in a load of beers and go get pissed in your house with your mates. Where there's nobody at all to check any sort of distancing."
Yeah, no, exactly.
Seems
and I mean,
bizarre.
the other thing is, she said having people can have a beer after work outside. Isn't the cielo abierto thing still kind of meant to be in place? So technically, if you can have a beer outside, I don't know.
Every bar owner I've spoken to about cielo abierto has nothing good to say, and a lot of confusion.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay. Well, look, guys, keep the comments coming in. We will get to them anyway if we've more to say. But maybe we'll dedicate another show to this too. But we'll move on because we've a lot to get to on our accommodation, and we will be getting to that just after the half-hour mark. But before that, quickly, Ollie, we were kind of talking about common sense policing, community policing almost, which is sorely lacking here at the best of times. But as we mentioned at the top of the show, Esmad once again in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. What's happened this time?
Yeah, so, and actually I'd almost say surprisingly little in the headlines, to be honest. I was kind of having a flick through the headlines just before we came online. Doesn't seem like it's making that great news. And also, it's one thing that I always find very odd in Colombia is the disparity between how much a certain circle of person talks about something and how much the country as a whole pays attention to it. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But yes, so there was a kind of march, demonstration, protest on Wednesday, relating to the HAP, the Special Justice Court. Obviously there's been horrific news about that recently, that the falsos positivos is an even bigger scandal. As though it weren't horrific enough, Anyway, students out on the street, mainly from the Pedagogica, no surprise there. Registering their displeasure. There was what I think was referred to as a disturbio, desorden, these euphemistic terms that we always have. At the end of it, we've got 4 people injured. 4 people reported as injured. I'm sure there would have been a lot more with minor injuries. And one of these lads lost, very badly damaged in one eye, could lose the sight. I think what's particularly worrying about this is that our mayor has felt the need to go on to her Twitter and say, let's not allow him to become stigmatized. I think there's something incredibly worrying about a police force. If you're saying that you think there's a danger that we're going to stigmatize a civilian who was blinded by security forces in a really minor point. I mean, we're not talking about mass civil unrest here, Brendan. you could make a case, I think, for some protests in Bogota that you could say, okay, police maybe thought there was the risk of, a major incident. Maybe they thought their own lives were in risk. That absolutely does not seem to have been the case here. I'm sure details will come out later. But I think what's really worrying about this is that there's no real outcry. This is being seen as a fairly standard thing to have happened. And if we're normalizing, people being this badly injured by the police, we're putting ourselves in a very dangerous position.
Yeah, interesting you should say that. We did talk yesterday when we were doing our planning for today about, like, it's mentioned in certain elements of the media, like Vanessa De La Torre, the presenter at Caracol Radio, and she had lots of tweets about it and things like that. But the argument could be, well, it's those privileged types who are kind of saying, oh, well, isn't this a disgrace? And then off they head, they finish their program and they stop tweeting about it, and that's it. Whereas those who are most at risk to be actually affected by this, directly affected, don't seem to care. I was in my panaderia this morning when the headlines came on and that was mentioned, and it showed, they were talking about it then with an image, and it just showed somebody spray painting, and the panaderia owner was like, oh, well, why don't they just, protest peacefully? That was what she said. Now, it just showed a guy spray painting. He wasn't doing anything terribly untoward, but there you go. Maybe that's the kind of angle some people are taking. Oh, well, he probably was being a bit of a vandal and deserved it.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's really the sickening thing here. In many ways, not only that the police operate like this, but that there's no real... there doesn't seem to be. And yes, absolutely, I agree. If I look at my WhatsApp statuses, for example, none of the builders are complaining about it. It's exclusively middle-class journalists that are complaining about it.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, we'll leave the news element of it for now. In about 2 minutes, guys, we are going to be talking about accommodation in Bogota, and we'll get to your comment. I think it was Alexandra that wrote in relation to that. She was quick out of the blocks there, writing that comment at the top of the show. We want to hear more of your accommodation experiences here. But before that, Ollie...
Especially things that are different or quirky or odd about Colombia, yeah, especially.
Of course. But just quickly, because we've been slacking a little bit on our Everton and James watch, but it's been a good week for Everton. Their first win at Anfield since 1999. Now, of course, Liverpool are going through a slump anyway. But James, the star of the show, and you're telling me now that there's something to do with a supporters club or something here in
Yeah, so it's big news. The Everton Supporters Club of Colombia has been formally recognised by the club. It's the first one in Latin America. I mean, to be honest, well, actually, no, it is surprising because there is an Everton in Chile, maybe. There's an Everton somewhere down in South America, somewhere on the Pacific. I'm not sure. Anyway, but yes, the first one to be registered in South America. Great news. Actually, I find talking to students, talking to people, there is a genuine interest in Everton. James is that popular, and it was him that popped up in the early minutes of the game on Sunday, slipping through Richarlison to put Everton ahead. So yeah, key role in it.
Yeah, of course. Well, actually, that is it. Antonio Casales and et al. They have a program on ESPN. Hablamos de Football, I think, is what it is, and in the background, the images of Jerry Mina and James together in their Everton shirt. So yeah, it's obviously great for Everton Football Club to have the two lads there, and of course, well, James was the one that really brought Everton to attention here, I guess. But yeah, anyway, I get. Quick mention is the other blue team, but north of Hadrian's Wall, Rangers flying it in Morelos. I always get that surname wrong. Scored a goal. For so the Colombians doing well.
Yeah,
we move on. We're
not. I don't think any of us are big fans of Rangers, are we? But there you go.
No. Anyway. Yeah, so let's
And,
leave
but to be fair, Morales is a Catholic and he's scoring for Rangers, so mixed feelings.
Is he? I don't know. Are you sure he's a Catholic? He might be.
Yeah, no, fair point. Maybe he's a proddy. Okay, fair point. I take it back.
He could be born again Christian. Anyway, accommodation, Ollie. We were scratching our brains here, coming up with our plan, and as we said at the start, we've got a 5-step or a 5.5-step plan to go with this. But what Alexandra wrote, because I think this is going to be kind of the basis of what we're talking about here. Well, I came back to Colombia after 18 years living abroad. I'm still living with my parents since accommodation is overpriced and full of red tape for those with less than 6 minimum salaries.
I think that's over-egging the pudding a little bit. Plenty of people in Colombia rent accommodation at a great deal less than 6 minimum salaries. Well,
it's going to depend what you want, basically.
Yes, that's a big thing.
I'm paying for my room 101 here, 550,000, 550,000 pesos a month, all included. But of course, ideally I'd prefer something more independent, but one has to balance up how long am I going to be here, because now I'm further away from residency than I was 3 years ago. That's another story. Right, our step-by-step process, because it's not about us. It's not about us. We might throw in a few anecdotes here and there. But first of all, if you just land in the country, and we're kind of saying this is half the first step, you might be staying in, more than likely in a hostel or a hotel or even Airbnb, which I know you're not a massive fan of, Ollie. But these days, because of the pandemic, and if you're not going to be in the country for that long, maybe I'm going to be here for 6 months or whatever. And as we'll discuss, there can be hassles trying to get your own place or whatever, or even moving into a house share. That if you're happy enough in your hostel, hotel, or Airbnb, you could probably make a deal, because now is the time with the pandemic. I'm sure Airbnb owners, hostel owners, hotel owners would only be happy to have a longer term client in place, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You'd be well worth, especially if you're doing something like extending a permiso de ingresar. So you're really only looking at 6 months. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if a hotel would be willing to accommodate you on that one.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, let's start with our proper step then anyway. So you are going to stay and you kind of want something more, independent or homely that's not a hotel or a hostel. The first big thing, and I mentioned this in the intro, is that, it's just, you've got to decide where you want to be in the city. And for most foreigners here, that's generally from La Candelaria up to 150. And then there are silly people, well, not silly, then there are the oddballs like myself that are way up in 174. But, but you need to pick your area. And why this is important, I guess, Ollie, is because once you know your area, then you go around and you check what's available. But of course, that's going to depend on your job and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, well, it's going to depend a lot on you, yeah. And I think we were talking about this earlier. It's really interesting for me that certainly looking at places to live in London, proximity to transport. And when I say transport, I mean underground or a train station. That's what you want. That's what you need. At a pinch, you might be looking at good bus services, but really you'd be looking for good bus services on top of your train connection, whether it's an underground train or an overland. But that's actually, and I would say that's similar to most most major cities around the world. You need to be near to transport. And I'd say actually if I lived in Medellin, I would probably do that. Although actually, I think a lot of people, certainly a lot of foreigners, don't actually. They tend to live in Poblado, which is actually very much off the metro. And I think that's quite interesting. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I live where I do is because I'm right on the Transmillennial. But, most people don't seem to consider that, if anything, it's almost seen as a negative point. That you're going to have buses going past you all the time. And I think the real one is security, put simply.
Yeah, and as we were talking about, some people now, this doesn't apply to either of us, but some people in more important jobs, it's stipulated in their contract, that they can't go outside certain zones, or if they do, they won't be covered with insurance or whatever. So that's another issue. And I guess if you're in that kind of a job, then you're probably going to be limited to around Rosales, Parque 93, and places like that. Of course, the upper end of the city. But then again, you're more than likely going to be earning a decent dollar or euro wage to justify living there. Because basically, if you want to get a place obviously we're speaking Bogotá specifically here, Parque 93, Rosales, you are going to be paying European prices for an apartment, more or less. I would assume. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first of all, anyway,
It's interesting, what Alexandra Pacheras again says here. She says Colombia is more car orientated than public transport. And of course, that's absolutely not true. Although what she says is, at least in certain stratos, and that very much is true. And I think that's really the key here. The people who are looking for somewhere to stay, who are kind of on the open market, moving around regularly, do tend to be the type of people who have cars. But of course, 80% of the city, there are 4 times as many people that don't use private cars as do, which is, much more than, say, in my hometown or in your hometown, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. A couple of things on that, by the way. Well, number one, Angela, we're not ignoring your comment, but we're going to be getting to that in terms of documents and debtors in step 4. So stay tuned. We will get to that. I was going to say, though, as well, this is kind of, it's related because we're talking about transport and things like that. And we are going to focus on transport in next week's episode, guys, like a fully dedicated episode to public transport. And obviously we'll touch on private transport as well. But one thing that came into my head, Ollie, is that there were a few reports, and these get criticized. And a friend of mine, an Irishman who's lived in Jakarta and now lives here in Bogotá, where Bogotá is rated like on the top of the list of traffic congestion. But I was thinking, like, if you live in the north of the city, maybe then it isn't that bad. But how many foreigners who live here have to make a commute from Ciudad Bolivar to the city centre or to Parque 93 on a daily basis? None. So maybe it is very bad when you're down that side of the city.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, again, we've talked about this, and I'm sure we'll talk about it next week when we talk about things like the plan for the Septima. There's a great big thing where the horrific commute times suffered by many people in the city are just ignored because they don't affect, the people who write in newspapers, put simply. But anyway, imagining that you've worked out where you want to be in the city, whether that's Chapinero, or whether that's Cedritos, or whether that happens to be, let's say, the Macarena or Teusaquillo, Soledad. And let's be honest, there are quite a lot of zones of the city, vast swathes of the city that, put simply, just aren't really on the menu for many people. Well, or for our type of foreigners, let's say, without wanting to be snooty or sniffy about it. That's the simple reality of it. I think you're not going to find very many English or Irish people living down in Bosa or in Suba. Yeah, absolutely. But in Bosa, let's say, or Ciudad Bolivar, as you mentioned.
Yeah, so basically you found your place, Ollie, and we mentioned this in the intro. So how do you look for it? So in other countries, you might go on whatever website that's popular. Gumtree, I think, was one I used to use when I was in Belfast, and blah, blah, blah. Here, those kind of things exist. You've got Finca Raiz, you've got Bogotá short-term rentals on Facebook. You can even just do a simple Facebook search. But the most
Metro Cuadrado.
Metro Cuadrado, yes. But the most effective way, Ollie, is just to take a day or two and walk around your neighbourhood. That is still the best way, yeah?
Still the best way. If for no other reason, Brendan, you know exactly what the building's like. Yeah, okay, you're not going to be able to see inside the apartment itself, but you can definitely see what the building's like. You know exactly what the area's like. You know, you can skip on past that kind of thing, and usually it's going to be a lot cheaper.
Really? Yeah, I wouldn't know if it's a lot cheaper than if you're checking on. Well, it depends what's on Bogota short-term rentals. But I mean, I'm kind of casually doing this right now as well, and yeah, like this neck of the woods that I'm in, Verbenal, San Antonio, that greater area. Yeah, it's just. I mean, there are so many places available right now. The thing is, you can be spoiled for choice. But coming back to Alexandra's point. Like I am in an area where sometimes it can be difficult to get something that doesn't look like it was constructed in the 1970s. So that's kind of going to be coming up in our next steps as well, talking about like what you can expect and maybe what you don't want in terms of what kind of a place will you get for 550,000 if you're trying to go on your own. Now, the places I've seen Apartment Studios of late for like 650,000 or whatever basic, and then there will be services on top of that. But yeah, like getting them finished. But that's we'll get to that in kind of step 3 and 4. But basically, walking around is the most effective way. Take your notes, have your phone full of credit or whatever, or have a good plan because you'll be making a lot of phone calls. And a lot of the time, Molly, too, like you make the phone call and they say, oh yeah, I can be there in 15 minutes, or there'll be somebody to let you in, so you can get to see it. There and then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd set an afternoon aside. Absolutely. Imagine that you're going to be on the street and you're going to be walking back 10 minutes later to pop inside. Yeah, so convenient.
One quick thing I want to mention on the sign. Sometimes you might see no extranjeros, and you kind of go, "Oh, that rules me out." But that no extranjeros is a code, and I'm smiling. It's kind of sad. Well, it is sad, but generally, it doesn't mean. Especially English-speaking foreigners from a richer country. You are exempt from that no extranjeros remark.
Yeah, we all know what extranjeros is a code word in many ways, isn't it? Alexandra makes a really good point actually here, which is something we should have talked about yesterday. She says she's in the Italian community in Bogota, Swiss, Portuguese, Facebook groups. Absolutely. Going by, I don't know about the Irish group, but certainly the Brits do share pieces of advice. I've had people sort of get in touch with me and say, hey, do you know anybody who rents rooms? And I've sort of said, oh yeah, there's this place or there's that place. So absolutely, there's sort of home networks. And also they'll know places where people are a little bit more flexible over paperwork, which is, you know, what we're coming on to fairly shortly.
Yeah.
Which is a key thing, yeah.
Exactly. And well, Alexandra's comment's going to pop up here. She's explained to us what we mean when we say no extranjeros. But yeah, so basically you've found your place, you've wandered around, you've called the person and you said, this is where I want to live. It seems the right apartment or even the right room if you're just renting a room in a house. And then you may need papers. If you're renting a room in a house... Well,
before papers... Before papers, we're going into the building. Yeah, we're going into the building, and I think this is something. There's a few things about renting places in Bogota that might, I think, surprise. That might surprise a few people from other countries. One is quite simply, it's not that unusual to not have hot running water.
Well, the famous. I meant to check the name. What do you call them?
Boccherini.
Boccherini showers. So they're the solution that if your shower just has cold water entering into it, go and buy yourself in Home Center or your nearest hardware store the Boccherini.
The good old Latin American death shower, yeah. Absolutely fine.
I always thought water and electricity was a bad mix, but there you go. It's great. Anyway,
there's a few other weird quirks. I mean, you might find as well that kitchens are tiny. A lot of
well, I was going to say tiny, Ollie, and like you do well. Again, it depends where you are. I guess if you're in Rosales and Estrato 4 upwards, you'll expect to get a fitted kitchen. But I've seen so many places. This is what I mean by like things that feel like they come from the 1970s or something. Just nothing. It might just have the I've got this name in Spanish in my head, lavos platos,
the dishwasher.
The sink, basically.
Sink, yes.
Yeah, sink. It might just have that, but nothing else. Not even like presses or cupboards, I should say. Nothing. It's why today I actually was just wandering by a place and they had closets, fixed closets in the rooms, and some cupboards in the kitchen. I was going, wow, this is actually a step above a lot of the normal things. I can understand maybe not having a stove or whatever because they feel people might be compelled to steal them or whatever. But fixed furniture, like if you're going to be renting it out for continuously, why not invest in that? It seems that a lot of people don't care about that kind of stuff. Clearly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Another thing that's quite important is places will often be unfurnished, like you say, which means you're bringing in a lot more stuff that you might not be used to that. Daisy here says that foreigners are scared of cold water. That's very true, Daisy. I've got a meter of hair here, and I don't really want. If I can avoid it, I don't want to be washing it in cold water.
Well, yeah, you've got an excuse, but no. In fairness, every now and again I do like cold water, especially if it's a hungover Sunday morning. But
I think the big one for me is washing plates, plates and washing clothes. You can't wash clothes in cold water. That's a simple fact, doesn't kill things. But okay, let's imagine you've got everything on, and this is your dream apartment, and you want to get it solved, get it sorted, get it stamped. Well, get ready for paperwork.
Yes, okay, we're on. Just before we do that, Angela's made the point, or Angela, about kitchens before the 80s were probably huge, and after the 80s are now small, in the Estrato 4 and upwards. Which, I don't know. You'd know more about that than we do, Angela. But yeah, big kitchens, like they are. In fairness, that's the one good thing I like about where I am at the moment. There is a big kitchen. You just cannot beat them. Anyway, paperwork, Ollie. Now, I guess we can touch on, because we're kind of talking here about renting and things like that. You're a homeowner, which is another kettle of fish. But Angela made the comment earlier about like, oh, do you need all these debtors and things like that in our countries for renting?
Sort of. Yeah. In England, sort of is the answer. You would certainly renting as a student. Our parents very much had to underline the debt because landlords are not happy about renting out to students. To be honest, though, once you have a job, landlords, they kind of interview you in person, as it were, to show you around the house, and they just make a snap judgment on whether they trust you or not. There's usually somebody undersigning it, but very rarely with paperwork checks. It tends to be just put a signature on and we're good.
Yeah, because like here, to be honest, my landlady initially asked for work certifications. I forget what else she looked for. Did she ask for a fee? And I'm only renting a room in the house, but I kind of just said, look, I do this, blah blah blah, and we do. This is where, to use that horrible word, the gringo card kind of can play to your advantage at times. They kind of go, well, it's a gringo, English speaking as well. On top of that, he's surely not going to screw me over.
Yeah, but actually I would say, this is coming back to what Angela was saying about the co-debtors. Yeah, absolutely. Fiadores, as they're known here, real headache for many foreigners. You're unlikely to have met somebody in the first couple of months that you're here who's willing to say, oh yeah, I own property in Colombia and I'm willing to put that at risk by underwriting your rental agreement. I think basically though, look, one of my friends was recently looking very close to me, so every time I was walking the dogs, I was taking photos and sending them on to him to say, there's this place or there's that place, ring this number, yada, yada, yada. And there's I've really started noticing which places aren't being rented. And there's a few buildings around here that just aren't filling up again. It's normal for them in January to have people leave, but they're just not coming back. And yeah, there's a couple of buildings that have been empty now for 4 months, 5 months, and yeah, you could lowball those guys. You could make an offer. You could say, hey, well, fine. You want to let it be empty for another couple of months, be my guest, or take the offer I'm making.
Well, it's interesting. Another Irish friend of mine who lives around near enough to Hacienda Santa Barbara, at the other side of the Septima. But he said there's been a house there next to him, and the owner's been trying to sell it for years. And he has such a price, but he's got it fixed in his head that it has to be this price, and he hasn't sold it. So I don't know, maybe some people are a little bit stubborn or whatever, and they're prepared to dig their heels in on that. But of course, I was talking about documents, just bringing it back to that. Like if you're going into a place, and actually this just happened to me yesterday. Somebody had said, "Oh well, I need the Theodore, blah blah," and I said, "Well, look, I could, not kind of saying that I'm flash with cash, especially now that I don't have a steady income at this moment in time, but I could, technically pay 2 or 3 months in advance in lieu of a Theodore." That's how I kind of sometimes play it. Because I could get a Theodore, because I do know people who could do it for me. I've been here long enough. But it's just hassle. I'm just kind of going, do we really need to do that? Do we really, have to go through all that stuff? Just trust me. I'm a good guy, please.
And also, look, Latin America, it's a continent of solutions, not of problems. Or because there's so many problems, there's so many solutions. Generally speaking, they'll be creative, they'll work around it. And again, as long as you're prepared to meet somebody halfway, if you're prepared to put up the sacrifice and say, yeah, look, I'll give you 3 months up front as a deposit, they're likely to go with that. It's also worth noting that all of that paperwork is generally, if you're doing it 100% above board. If you're subletting or so forth, it might be a lot more flexible. One thing that's super interesting, though, is once you've got all the papers signed and ready to go, and legally or not, as the case may be, moving in can be an interesting process. I was amazed to find recently that it was recently decreed that you absolutely have the right to have a pet if you're renting.
Yeah.
Which I can't think of any other country in the world that I've have any experience of where that's a human right.
Yeah, I would have thought that was up to the discretion of the landlord or landlady. Yeah.
In practice, it might be, but that's not a legal request.
Okay, because I did see a sign the other day saying no mascotas, in other words, no pets allowed. But I could knock on their door or ring the number and kind of go, sorry about it, guys, that's illegal. You have to let us have a pet. But yeah, moving in, other things. Just, again, we talked about in the earlier steps, if you're just here for like a short-term stay, or you're not sure, like I am now. Once again, my visa expires in November, so I'm not even sure will I be here next year if I was to get my own place, and I want to get internet. I could face a problem or two, because most internet providers expect you to sign at least a 1-year contract. That's
right, and they can be pretty weird about this. I once had a cedula that was expiring at the end of the year. This was when I was on year-long contracts, and so my visa ran for a year at a time, and my cedula also ran for a year at a time. And Claro said, no, it would be fine as long as you get your contract on the 1st of January. It's fine. And it will run till the 31st of December, that's fine. Any other dates? No, we're not having it. And even when I said, look, I can give you the whole 12 months in cash right now to the manager, he wasn't having it. Absolutely was not having it. He said, oh, but you might leave the country. Which I said, well...
By the way, I have a feeling Alexandra must have got a copy of our running order here or whatever, because she's preempted talking about the administración. Now, before we get into that, The last few places I've been in, there has been administration, the administration, because I've been in a conjunto. I will say, of course, the way around administration is just go and get a house or a flat or apartment or whatever that's not in a conjunto. Now, if you're in the Estrato 4s and upwards, that's impossible, I think, to get. But if you're in a Strato 3, like most places I've been looking at of late, don't have that. You're just dealing directly with the or with the property owner, I should say.
I would say, by the way, here, Brendan, I would happily pay, I would say, 100,000 extra in rent to avoid being in a conjunto.
Yeah, because let's talk about some of the ridiculous things. And guys, we're not going to have time to get through all of this because we are coming up to the end of the show. But there's a wonderful article in the Bogotá Post from 2018. Ollie, do you know what the headline is if people can search it and just read?
Battle of the Buildings, and I'll post it on our version of this Facebook feed at the end of the podcast. So keep your eyes peeled for that. It is a fantastic link.
Because just like run through a couple of the silly things that these administrations expect of you or demand of you or impose on you, like that if your house or flat comes with a parking spot. If you don't have a car, some of them will say, well, you can't put your bike there, it's only for a car.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I mean, I could understand, Brendan, if you said, oh, well, look, because, I mean, there's a parking space attached to my apartment, downstairs. Look, I would understand if I was just dumping sofas and stuff and old fridges in there. I would understand that would be a real pain in the ass for anybody for me to move it out of the way. But to be told, oh, no, you can't have a bicycle. And my favourite thing is it's cheapening the apartment, Brendan. It's making us look like we're poor people who have bicycles. And, this is even in the cases where these incredibly expensive carbon frame bikes. Absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, it is mad. There's another thing though, Ollie. Sorry, it's not kind of to do with administration, but it is as well. That pick the day you're moving in. If you're moving in on a holiday or a Sunday, you may not be allowed to move in on that day. Is that the case? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. You might just be told sorry. And to be fair, actually, I don't think that's terribly unreasonable in that, it's quite nice to have some protection, in some ways on a Sunday morning. But then also, you've got porteros, and the way some people in conjuntos treat their porteros is appallingly bad. Do you remember the case of the lady that was essentially kidnapped, kept prisoner in a conjunto in the north?
Yeah. Well, now that you mention it, I remember that. Like ridiculous. Okay, I'm kind of caught between a rock and a hard place with this because, like, number one, I kind of just like I'm very independent and I'm already in a house share, so I don't like porteros, the vigilantes, whatever you want to call them, kind of knowing every time I go in, go out, and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I mean, it does provide a lot of employment for these people who, if they weren't working in that, what would they be working in? You'd have to ask. I mean, how many vigilantes, porteros are employed in this city alone? I mean, thousands.
And also remember, again, if you're in a house share, and you may well sympathise with this, Brendan, a lot of house shares, it's like something out of the 70s or the 80s. In England sometimes, I remember talking to a friend once who'd moved, a fellow journalist who'd moved over from London, and he was sort of saying, oh, what do you think of this place in this area? He sent me a couple of pictures. I think there was an advert. He sent me a picture of the advert, and I said, oh, have you checked that you can use the kitchen? And he said, well, yeah, of course there's a kitchen. I was like, no, have you checked you can use it? He goes, well, yeah, why wouldn't I be able to use the kitchen? I said, look, just check it, Matt. Just before you waste your time going out to Salitre, just check it. Get a WhatsApp, half an hour later saying, she says I can't use the kitchen or the washing machine. How the hell am I going to wash clothes? And I was like, yeah, you'll find a lot of landladies like that.
Yeah, I have to say, thankfully here, there are no restrictions like that. We'll finish because I know we've got only 30 seconds left. Quick one. I remember a friend of mine was living down in Santa Isabel in a similar thing. A girl one night, wasn't even a partner, but she couldn't get a lift home that night, so she stayed in his room. He got up the next morning. There was a padlock on the main door, so that he couldn't get out because the landlady wanted to address the issue of him having a woman back in the house. That is time. Our producer is telling us, guys, thanks for all the comments. We appreciate it when you do get involved.
Absolutely.
Writing them. We will be coming back to this, I think, because there's a lot in it. Next week, it's public transport. Until next week.
Ciao.